Welcome, adventurers, to another enchanting episode of Lore Drop. I'm Dungeon Master Eguile.
And I'm D&D Wife, your guides to the hidden depths of the world of Extrayus.
Tonight, we unravel the secrets that lie beneath the surface of our Homebrew campaign. We'll dive into the lore, the legends, and the magic that makes Extrayus so captivating.
We'll explore the stories behind the realms, the characters, and the world building that brings our adventures to life.
Whether you're a dungeon master seeking inspiration, a writer crafting your own fantasy worlds, or just a fan of immersive storytelling,
there's something here for you. Join us as we reveal the mysteries of Extrayus and share our creative journey with you.
Get ready for a new Lore Drop, where imagination meets creation. Let's embark on this magical adventure together. Hello, adventurers, and welcome to another episode of Lore Drop, where we go into a deep dive into the various aspects of Extrayus. I am Dungeon Master Eguile, and as always, my fabulous co-host, D&D Wife.
Hello, everybody.
But as always, we are still running with our our multi-part series on the magical systems of Extrayus.
Yeah.
We're about halfway done, and I know it's been a
long
lot,
journey.
Right? It's a lot of information, but it's also the kind of keystone foundation of kind of any RPG game.
Right, and any new world.
Right, any homebrew world, you
Yeah.
kind of really need these kind of fundamental pieces. And we always decided to go a little extra on ours. But really, today's topic, we're going to be looking on to the next of the four parts of the next ring of the array, which is divine magic.
Yeah.
Now, with this, obviously, as a note, as most would assume, just like with demonic magic, you got to kind of take a little bit of your thoughts of the kind of traditional.
Yeah, it's not quite what we assume divine is.
We're not looking at angels and heaven and all
Cherubs.
that kind of stuff. It's more of the terminology used in our world that we apply to the magic, because it is referred by our citizens of Extrayus as divine magic.
Yep.
So in order to keep that kind of not have this confusion, that's how we keep the kind of terminology going.
Yeah.
So really what we're going to be looking at, as always, is we're going to look into some of our insights that went into the creation, the mechanics, and then also the kind of impact it has into our world.
Yeah.
So that way you kind of see that three-part kind of thought process that goes in, so that you can not only use it in your games, or kind of see how we came about coming up with this idea.
Yeah, how we applied it too.
And as always, as I have D&D Wife here as a player, she kind of gives her player perspective as being a member of that world, which is always nice to have for kind of a DM to be able to bounce
And as a fellow
off.
magic user as well in the world.
Oh, yeah. It doesn't touch you as much on this one.
Not this one,
Yeah,
This
which is-
one's more of a Tobias thing.
Right. And so, obviously, you always got to start with kind of the creation, kind of cutting room floor of everything. And for us, we kind of knew we had to have something, like a divine, a celestial, a kind of magic to represent the gods, essentially.
Yeah, or what would become the gods of Extrayus.
Right, but you and I, we were always talking about how are we going to go do this? How can we really, build? And it's, and then it was like, okay, we look at other pantheons and it's like, okay, well, how in depth is this pantheon?
Right.
Are we doing like
How
everything,
much?
like the god of the grain and of fasting? And or are you just doing kind of life, death, good, bad?
The
dark,
ocean, the sky.
Dark, light,
Yeah.
just the standards. And so we just knew we needed to find a balance, because we already had the demonic and the fae forces, which we knew were these like external forces. They're not native.
They were from outside.
Right? They're not even native to the dimension that
they're
Extrayus
completely outward.
occupies,
Yeah.
right? And so because of that, we're like, okay, we need a balance. Everything kind of has to balance back. So we wanted to make an internal kind of magic that is from Extrayus itself to kind of counterbalance some of that chaos.
Yep.
And so the other thing too is that obviously, we happen to play D&D 5th edition. We don't know if we're going to upgrade yet
Yeah,
to
we'll
the
see.
new one. But because of that, obviously we want our world to also play into some of the kind of mechanics of the game. So, you have things like clerics, paladins.
Right.
So
and we have to create a system for
Right,
that.
and so we wanted to make sure we could find something that could not only explain how clerics work, and it's not just cuz,
Because it
which
happened.
as much as it has to be sometimes, I hate that as a DM where I'm like, well, it just is.
If we can't explain it, let's try.
Right, and so that way we now have a way to do that. And so we already kind of had this idea that obviously, as we talked about, Fae was imagination. and demonic was emotion.
Yeah, extremes.
So we needed something that was more spiritual and that kind of had more of an alignment system because, you know, when you think of gods, you have everything from the most horrifically evil to the most Mahatma Gandhi, you know, doing everything they can to be peaceful.
So the qualifier couldn't just be good.
Yeah. And so that way, we really wanted to find and create that notch. And so divine is really not about innate power, but one that is a connection, a spiritual will that is outside the kind of the bounds of control because it comes from one being to another.
Yeah, yeah. Or sometimes within, it just, you know, depends on what you're going.
Because, I mean, I know you being kind of my resident, you know, spiritual expert and kind of the deities and magic and crafting, I know you kind of gave me a lot of warnings about trying to just create a pantheon just kind of like out of the blue.
Well, it's tough. It's tough. You really have to balance it. And if you then also want to apply that to in-game mechanics, that creates a whole other layer of complicatedness.
Yeah, what you were always reminding me was like, hey, you know, if they're going to be this, you got to make sure that their domain
everything
is clear
lines up,
and everything lines up. So it was always kind of like, okay, well, maybe what if we do no gods?
Right? Or start off with, you know, maybe they might be created.
Yeah, and I think the real biggest difference is we do have kind of what we refer to as divines, but they aren't ever like a creature that was just kind of like birthed.
Yeah, it was never really like that. I think we just went with a more of a sort of creation power sort of thing,
right? Because I found that like a lot of creation stories, like I'm very into like Athens and Greece and all of that, and so like, you know, you look at things like Zeus, you know, and Kronos and the, you know, all going up the train, and it always seemed to always be downward, right? So a god was made by a titan, and a titan has been around since eternity and in Demorum and, you know, all that kind of stuff, right?
Yeah.
Ours is the reverse. Now it's somebody from a low aspect, a mortal,
up.
rising up to become this aspect that can now channel its magic and its essence, its willpower to others.
Yeah. So do I get this right? All gods for Extrayus are essentially ascended gods?
Yes, they all kind of have to originate as a being or creature of Extrayus.
Whereas the Fae and demonic are outside external forces.
Right, exactly. And so that creates that kind of dichotomy. And the other aspect is, you know, Fae and demonic, we have them as being these kind of primordial powers, right? They have existed for eternity. It's, in fact, as our lore went in the demonic one, that actually is kind of the recoalescence of the demon world that existed beforehand.
Yeah, that was destroyed and sort of reformed from what was remaining at the debris.
So that just shows that there really isn't any kind of stopping these forces. Whereas divine didn't exist, but now has come into existence.
Because we always just, I think, we as people in general in the world want to believe in higher powers, and so we tend to sort of lean into that.
It really doesn't matter whether it becomes an object, a person,
anything.
Creatures have a natural thinking. Creatures kind of have a natural inclination to look for these like
patterns,
sources of worship.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right, and so I think that really creates an important aspect that we also wanted a world that evolves. Like we knew that our world and the way we're designing Extrayus was that this is an ever evolving world based on the adventures and that the players themselves feel like they can change the world. So for example, you brought up with Tobias. So he's interacting with the divine that it really doesn't know itself what's going on.
They have no clue themselves that they are divine.
So now you have a player that is like essentially going on an adventure with this other creature that's this divine entity and also helping them understand. Whereas in other more kind of established worlds, you're maybe
the gods are ancient at this point.
You've never heard of. They're beings that are long since that you can't even look at them. Your eyes burn out. So it really, I think, becomes interesting to start at that. And I think that's really how we came to the kind of concept of how we kind of tied it all together.
And whereas other sort of magical systems might focus on the power connection, our divine is really focused on this personal connection that the chosen, whoever the chosen scions of that power are, have to create with their god.
Yeah, and I think that's nice too, because it is that, like, there's no hiding this magic. So that was also kind of an annoyance of mine when we first started building our idea of the deities and the divines and gods was, okay, but I always hated the idea of, like, okay, this super omnipotent good god, but doesn't actually do anything to help
to do good
or do good. Or then you have these dark evil gods that masquerade as good gods, and somehow they're able to do good. Like, you know, I'm the god of death, but then I'm giving healing magics to my clerics because I'm faking that I'm a good. Well, how does that really work if they're only the dominion of death?
Right.
You know, and so it's like
be possible.
You should know. Okay, well, you know, obviously their entire essence is death. Why would you go, oh, they're a good guy? Yeah, so that was always what bugged me. So when we really went into the ground for divine, it was, okay, when you make this connection, there's no hiding it. You may have a story that you were the greatest hero in the nation.
That's gone now.
You gave away everything, but in reality, you were murdering. You were a slaver. You were the most horrible person on earth. Yes, the story of you was grand.
Sure.
But now, when your worshipers who hear this story and go, "Oh, we want to be good guys like him," they're not actually able to access any of that.
There's no power there, because they're not embodying the true
The lower
nature.
drudges of society suddenly find themselves capable of, you know, misty stepping without even realizing it, or blending into
hearing
shadows.
A sinister voice from the shadows.
Suddenly they can, you know, have incredible feats of strength because they are unknowingly tapping into it, because they more closely align to the actual divine's alignment.
And then that name becomes more known in the seedier parts, than say the loftier parts of society.
So kind of once we had all that kind of put together, and we kind of had a good aspect of, like, what exactly did we want to make it, we kind of started working on the mechanics, and this is usually where I take over a lot, because being the dungeon master, once the lore is created, mechanically it's always going to be kind of the next step that's going to be
How do you evolve flavor into actual mechanics?
And so because we really locked it into being rooted into the power of the spirit and the collective will, that kind of gave it another, like, extra tier of making sure that it works and it's not OP as all hell, because that's another problem with homebrew. I always get scared.
It's tough.
You're either going to make something that is essentially a pet rock and it's useless because everything else is too cool, or it's like you give them the access to the football and they're sitting on a nuke.
Right.
So it really becomes tough. So I had to make sure. But the way I really focused in my main thought process, and I like to do this a lot when creating things, is just get some kind of real world example that is closely related to your magic,
or that whatever, way you can understand it.
Whatever kind of fantasy setting, you know, what creature is close to that, you know, a lot of people, you know, look at a Komodo dragon as being more of like these crazy creatures, you know. So my instance for divine was looking at, like, instances in movies, history, where, like, a king or a general will give this large, you know, rousing speech to their troops, and all of a sudden you see what was originally these kind of tired, dejected troops. Now they're ready to go to war,
screaming at the top of their lungs,
just amped up. They have more strength than they've ever had. And that was when I was like, okay, that's it. That is how this is the idea of this kind of spreading of the spirit, the will, and that collective
the
will,
sharing of one's strength
that kind of bounces off, right? Because one person's belief in something raises the belief of someone else, because they're like, oh, he believes this, I believe it, now another, and it just grows into this kind of power system.
And because divine is based internally on Extrayus,
and
this explains how kings and generals can be given these powers.
And a good way to put this is the comparison of what we always joked about at our table is the oath of the king paladin, right?
Like, how does that work?
Right, the idea of, like, I swear to you, king, hey, look, now I have magic powers. You know, and it was like, how does that work? You know, so this now explains that.
Because Extrayus is a magical world. It's infused into the very fabric of the world. So it totally makes sense.
Yeah, and so a way to kind of give kind of that kind of idea of the mechanical nature is that obviously after the reaping games, you know, the entities that we now refer to as the divines were created during that time as a ritual was kind of performed as an attempt to ascend the kind of greatest heroes of the land as an attempt to not only fight back against the invading
more power,
Fae and demonic forces, but was also being done is creating essentially magical batteries. Because at the point, as we talked about chaos magic affecting Extrayus's magic, any of the, the elves who are masters of the arcane were finding their magic was just going haywire. So you got a race that was bound almost exclusively from using arcane, who now cannot wield that magic,
at least not with any degree of accuracy,
which is why they were so desperate to make these what were basically magical batteries. Eternal batteries is how they would phrase them, which would allow them to now kind of grab that energy and cast whatever magics, use that power, and not suffer any kind of backlash. Because they themselves are not technically casting the magic.
The energy doing it for them.
So there is no opportunity for the chaos to interfere.
But so yet again, the elves are messing with the fabric of reality.
A lot of it is a lot of early work in Extrayus was obviously caused by the elves and their kind of desperate grab for power. But when you are, a race that is receiving memories and knowledge of things they could never really understand,
and sort of made from magic as well,
and they jump to a lot of conclusions in their grasp at staying the top species of Extrayus. And that's really what led to the downfall of not only almost the entire planet, but also the elves themselves. And really the way, because I didn't want this to be, this kind of what could essentially be overpowered ability as like you can just be like, well, guess what? The entire nation is clerics.
Right.
You have millions of clerics because everyone worships this one person.
One thing.
So I really wanted to make it have that selective nature of that you really have to understand the divine that you're trying to access. So it's not just something that is, oh, hey, I read a book that this guy did something good. I like that. Powers, magical powers. It's more of an innate kind of connection that not only does the divine have to create with the connector, but the connectee needs to understand the divine itself. And the better that they start to kind of understand each other's emotions, goals, and alignment, the more that energy becomes connected for both of them.
More synergistic.
Because the kind of blowback is that, because by the nature of divine magic is from Extrayus, the longer these divines essentially do not connect with mortals of the world, the more they actually lose that energy, that power, because now they're getting further and further away from their original existence, which was a mortal being of Extrayus.
It's like an unused battery sitting in a drawer, not actually being
eventually
used.
winds out.
Will lose its power.
So that also creates this kind of double fold where, yes, these divines also need their worshipers, their followers. So there is kind of this intrinsic need because, in other systems, these gods usually are so powerful. It's like, well, really, did you really need that street rat in the town of Waterdeep because they're going to be important one day? Or could you actually have just come down and fixed it in an instant?
Right. And just done it.
And so, but they're like, well, we're playing the long game. Our divines have to play the short game.
They're
like, if they don't start a PR campaign, if they don't start getting kind of their essence, their energy kind of put out, and they reach out for these clerics, these paladins, they're going to go away. So I like that in that it also puts the kind of shift on the cleric deity, the paladin deity dynamic to where it doesn't feel necessarily super subservient.
It's a little bit of a give and take between the two, and it's really interesting to see that sort of picky nature that divine magic adds as a flavor to the world. Because I've seen it.
Well, sorry, not to interrupt, but it's just more of that idea of like, this is how you can explain paladin oaths, where it's like, well, why do they have to follow these super stringent rules? Well, here's why. Because if they don't, it's not just like, oh, you messed up. It's you're
cut off.
You're not following the connection that you had with the divine.
And the chances of you reconnecting that is very small.
I mean, we haven't experienced it yet, but as the DM, I'm saying it ain't going to be easy.
It's going to be tough because you have to essentially prove yourself again, and you do have to. It's like you have to feel the repentance in yourself, right? And we've seen the sort of that picky nature that it has. Tobias, I think we've seen just so far in the story he's sort of treated the divine or the Twilight Mother as a friend.
Yeah.
It's not a sort of, oh, my lady, my highness or whatever.
And I think a lot of that started from in the beginning of their interactions where they both were kind of like, what
Who
are we
are
supposed to
you?
do?
Yeah.
Like it was just like they're
What are we
both kind of
here
like,
for?
well, we're here. I know I'm here, but I don't know what to do.
Yeah.
Maybe you know what to do. Maybe I know what,
Right.
And that really, I think, kind of when you're this cleric and you're connecting to your deity, you're always expecting them to be like, oh, they're gonna always show me the path. Like the beacon will light your path.
Yeah.
And this time it's like your deity's kind of like the other roommate going, hey man, you got the rent?
Where do we go?
I don't know if I can pay this bill. And you're like, wait, man, you're supposed to be the guy carrying me.
Come on.
So I think, yeah, and that picky nature, I think once we discover more of them, more of the divines, and there's kind of more interactions, I think that could lead to some kind of more fun interactions.
Yeah, that'll be very interesting to see. I think the Twilight Mothers is really nice for Tobias, but other gods might not be as calm.
That's definitely another deep dive for another one.
Absolutely. And, I think it just that will add so much more to the narrative, to the story. It enriches the world, giving us opportunities to interact with these beings as well as whoever they choose to represent them. It's going to be interesting to see any characters that maybe struggle with the strictures of their oaths and their commandments.
Yeah, I'm kind of, it's always that thing too, like I always say, when you do your level 1 character, it's kind of that like, okay, you can be a cleric, you can be a warlock because your backstory sets you up.
Yeah.
But it's always funny, like I have a rule in that, if you want a multi-class, say, and do a cleric, you need to find that particular contract, that deity, that temple. So it'll be interesting to see as, the party at this current time of recording is level 5.
Yeah.
Which usually sometimes we might see some multi-classing.
Right,
so I'm curious to see if we might see some of them kind of searching for maybe one that aligns with them. Yeah. And I think that'll be kind of interesting to see in later sessions.
Yeah. And like we said, it's more of like searching for a common friend or a
for a
common
buddy.
Yeah, not necessarily looking for a higher power, but someone to help.
Yeah.
Yeah, which is so nice, I think. Such a difference from the normal thought process of what a god is.
Yeah, and I think it's kind of it kind of plays off kind of an amalgamation of a lot of kind of real world like religions where it's some, not all, but there are some that try to balance the kind of humanity and the deity side where it's not just everything comes from on high. It's like no, there's some interactions intertwined, and that really shows you to prove the faith, prove the concept.
And they come from all different places too, which is nice. It's interesting to see. But what about the impact of divine magic on Extrayus?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, as we've been explaining, a lot of these magics are very influential. We talk about chaos magic that has essentially changed the entirety of how magic works.
It's almost literally explosive in Extrayus.
And so this is one of the unique ones in that it's not only relatively new in the grand scheme of, it's only been probably 250 years.
Yeah.
But in a sense that it's very subtly influencing the world. It's not really understood. And the example of like one of our characters, when they're a cleric, like we were saying, neither one of them really knew what they were, or what they are, what any of it meant.
They're learning together.
Nor were they told, oh yeah, there's these clerics, and sometimes you see a woman in the stars, and there were no stories.
None.
And even when he was casting magics as a cleric, healing magics, there was a lot of early stun, shock, and awe as to like how he was able to do this.
And some stumbling too. Sometimes the spell couldn't be cast right, or something. There were some tough times.
So it really, and the real reason for this is during the reaping games, as the elves were struggling and trying to find new sources of energy. During that situation and when the ritual happened, it was a success in that divines were created.
Yeah.
But at the same time, that pivotal moment, the elves also faded. They disappeared. So what happened is the only ones who actually had knowledge of what this magic was, even from a kind of very rudimentary understanding, like they hadn't had time obviously to mess with it. They were in a dire
research
it was like you found a scroll for some
ancient thing,
like shotgun formation, Hail Mary, chance and hell, but you don't have time to test it. But it wasn't
you just got to implement it now.
But because of their disappearance, that information was obviously gone. And the divines themselves that were created needed time because the spell is so new to our world. They needed time to essentially gather themselves
Get
back
used to
into
it.
sentience, into
Yeah.
consciousness.
Yeah.
And even now, they aren't necessarily like these, floating, shiny
Brains
bodies
or
on top of
something.
a mountain or
Yeah.
something. It's really more of their essence has been kind of spread out. And as they reach more and more and connect more, they're able to, through the connection, start to kind of coalesce a sort of form in their relatively areas that they exist in. So example of the Twilight Mother, she exists in the dreamscape.
And she has a sort of form.
Yeah, that we've seen, but we've seen that her form has begun to develop.
Yeah, just
Before she
barely.
was masked and you couldn't see her face.
Yeah.
Now there's been some of the players have gotten glimpses of sides of her face
yeah.
and have seen her weep and everything. And so I think that kind of shows that growth that both sides kind of get.
Because they have to create these very deep connections with whoever they choose to represent them in the world.
And so now what you have is, because some here or there are tapping into it, it's starting to become pretty much what you would see like in our natural world, right? Somebody can walk on water, people are going to start saying things.
Yeah.
So they, the message starts going, but then this is where that principal flaw comes in, right? So
Playing telephone.
when they suddenly go, oh, okay, so our hero must have become this, creature of power.
Great being.
Oh, they sacrificed themselves, but then no one truly knew who these heroes were, because during this time it was the chaotic time of the reaping games,
And a lot of knowledge was lost.
Send us your strongest.
Yeah.
So it could be that they're worshiping someone that may not have had the best of
Was
intentions.
a horrible person.
And because of that, they're actually never tapping into that power. And so there is this kind of idea. So what happens is you get some people, when they worship their divine, they get powers. But then you got others, when they worship theirs, nothing happens.
Interesting. So this is how we get different pockets of not lack of power and great
knowledge
power.
as well as disbelief and belief. Even though the magic system is universally occurring right now.
It's just the misunderstandings people have.
Because some people are going, well, this is someone who went, we don't get anything
We knew
from
he
this
was
person.
great.
Exactly. And so that really creates this kind of, in my mind, where essentially, I'm always planning on my NPCs are real people. So the way my NPCs also can't manipulate the system.
Yeah.
Because they themselves are in a constant state of being proven both true and false. And so we're going to see more, as obviously now that we have a player who is one of these.
And held under certain strictures
As well as is a solo. So obviously he is currently, as a story, he's been trying to spread and have other kind of dream fighters.
But he is right now the only one of his
connected
level.
to her. Yeah. And so it'll be interesting to see how that interaction, meeting others that might be much more of a kind of spread out following.
Yeah.
But really, right now, which is always what's super exciting, is just the idea of like seeing as the long term runs out. Because the biggest draw of divine magic, which is why people are like trying, even though it might be a myth or a rumor, because the potential of not having that blowback.
Yeah.
Because that's a big one. Right now it's more of the craze are willing to risk everything
Or
to
those
cast
who
magic or sell their magic.
Yeah.
But other than that, if you could actually access back to the days
Without
of Eden where
the
I could just
backlash.
cast whatever I want,
Yeah.
and I essentially have this permanent battery that is just going to be always at my beck and call.
Yep.
Obviously, once this information starts to grow, we could see a lot of crazy societal changes as this kind of desperate claw to, but not only rediscover who these divines were, but also however they can to access that power.
There might be renewed research into divine and divine beings.
Right. And obviously this is from the more macro, from the DM's perspective. I feel it's always kind of our job to look at that macro.
Yeah,
How's it going to affect
the greater
long-term?
world.
Whereas you, which is why I love having you as a player and my wife, is that I have someone as a player to give me those macro of like when they're in the world, they're like, hey,
what about the little guy? How are we
sometimes
affected?
You can kind of give me those tips and everything and kind of see. And I know you've been playing now for about almost 25 sessions.
Yep.
And we go 8 hours a session, people.
It's quite a few
so
hours.
how would you say that you feel that as a player it's been affecting as the story around your character Luna?
Well, if anything, because we're traveling with Tobias, the sort of air about divine magic and what it is has become more mysterious, if anything, because we see him doing these great feats of healing, of bringing people back from the very brink of death, and healing them up to have like no wounds on their bodies and things like that. That is something nobody has ever seen. And really for us players, it's a little different, obviously, right? Because we can suspend reality only so much. So we're kind of expecting that from our cleric. But to see it reflected from the citizens of Extrayus, from the NPCs that we meet, and seeing that shock and awe in their faces of how is this person casting this type of magic that is just erasing our wounds before our very eyes.
And I think another point with that too is like, you know, it also kind of, I think, increases the kind of autonomy of our cleric.
Yeah.
You know, a lot of times in story building, you know, it's like, okay, like, so in essence, you know, Bahamut. You know, it's like, oh, I'm a cleric of Bahamut. And then it just becomes, oh, okay, well, I don't care about you anymore. I know everything your deity's done, so everything I know about your deity must be you.
Yep.
And it's like, well, where went the individuality of that cleric?
Yeah.
Yes, they follow them, but that doesn't mean they're like them.
Right.
So in essence, like for ours, you know, Tobias has this a lot of room to kind of establish as being the kind of the face of this person.
Yeah.
So he kind of decides a lot more. And instead of it being, you know, oh, you did something, oh, okay, it must be the Twilight Mother. It always starts with, he succeeded in that. It's his
Tobias
start.
Has done this.
And even the Twilight Mother acknowledges his strength in kind of getting her through some of the struggles.
She congratulated him on, you know, certain feats he's done and things like that, which is really lovely to see from a god, not just like, you must do this for me because I am.
Yeah. So I think I'm really looking forward to kind of what goes down the line and what divines are extinguished and what are supported as the story progresses. It really comes down to, obviously, a lot of our stories are based on the Mirren continent right now. And when we move to the Hume, I think that's when a lot more of that will be developed, less passively off to the side.
Because right now we've seen a few like smaller sort of proto religions start popping up. Little sort of deities maybe start springing up here and there, but nothing concrete yet. It's really just in its infancy, which is nice to see too.
Right. And so obviously, you know, there's always a lot to unpack with all of our magic. And as we say, ours is much of an evolving system. I imagine here in a few years, we'll probably end up doing another deep dive on all our magic. And some of the things might be completely different as we go. But we really wanted to focus on those like major aspects of like, you know, and when it comes to if you're wanting to make, you know, your magic system, is first just kind of come up with that concept where we just kind of sat and really you and I just kind of spitball, sitting on the couch, having dinner.
Want, what we don't want, you know?
Yeah. What would this look like? Hey, how would this look? Do we want a pantheon? If we did, what would it look like?
What are our rules?
And as you notice, we do a lot of comparisons to the real world. Take your surrounding environments, give it a magical twist.
Yeah. And then pick and choose what you like, what you feel comfortable with, and what you think will work too within your own world.
Yeah. And so then we look, you know, then obviously you start kind of impacting the mechanics of it because obviously whatever system you're playing in, you want to make sure that your kind of deities, your power, your magics all work within that system.
Absolutely.
Whether it's D&D, whether it's Pathfinder, any kind of system, it doesn't matter because once you make the principal concept, it can be adapted to anything.
Absolutely.
And then last, obviously, is how it affects your world. Always look at it both on the macro and the micro.
Yeah, the potential impacts.
And be like me. Have a spouse who's a player, or have a player who
friend,
or have a player you can talk to kind of more directly, and have them kind of sit, and you know, maybe a fellow DM player, someone you can spit this kind of stuff back and forth with, so that they can kind of also help you. Because sometimes I could be sitting and writing something and you would come over and look and I'd say, and you're like, well, wait, what about this? And it would be like, why didn't I think about that?
Yeah.
And all it took was just saying it out loud to you.
Yeah. Just maybe having a different perspective on points can really help kind of hone where you want to go.
And obviously, we're almost to the halfway point. We have one more in this last section, and then we get to things like arcane and psionics and more fun. But we do appreciate going on this ongoing discovery and exploration of our new magic system. Now, obviously, we have one more in this next ring that we call kind of the spiritual essence of Extrayus. And the next one will be order magic.
Reason.
Yeah, so this is, you know, kind of our version of how the mechanical part of the world works, and kind of the one that's finally not chaotic.
Yeah.
Out of all of these.
In fact, the opposite of chaotic.
But as always, we always encourage you to listen and subscribe to our podcast in any medium that you have, whether it be Spotify, iTunes podcast, or just straight YouTube. Always search for the Lore Drop Podcast.
Yep. If you want to hear more, look for them there. Also, please join our Couple of Nerds Discord community where you can discuss divine magic and all of the other aspects of the world of Extrayus with our fellow fans. We'd love to hear from you.
Oh, yeah. And we appreciate all you're out there. We finally just hit our 50th subscriber on our YouTube channel, Couple of Nerds
excited.
Productions. We thank you for all of that.
Thank you so
We
much.
never thought we'd even get this far in 6 months.
Seriously.
So we appreciate everything. And obviously, keep listening, keep subscribing, and let us know anything you have to say about anything of the Extrayus project or any of the travelers.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. And once again, keep on adventuring. And that brings us to the end of this episode of Lore Drop. We hope you enjoyed exploring the rich lore and magic of Extrayus with us.
But the adventure doesn't have to end here. Join our Couple of Nerds Discord community to dive deeper into the world of Extrayus, share your own stories, and connect with fellow adventurers.
And don't forget to check out the Couple of Nerds YouTube channel. There you'll find all our content, from thrilling campaign highlights to miniature painting tutorials and more.
We love hearing from you, so be sure to leave your thoughts, questions, and ideas. Who knows, your input might just inspire our next episode.
Thank you for joining us on this journey through Extrayus. Until next time, keep your imagination alive and your dice ready.
Stay curious, stay creative, and may your adventures be ever wondrous. See
you in the next Lore Drop.